Hey guys, tonight we are stripping away the modern layers of our existence to figure out why on earth we started wrapping ourselves in fabric, fur, and questionable synthetic blends in the first place. Imagine yourself standing on an open, wind-swept savanna under a blazing sun that feels entirely too close to the ground. You're completely exposed to the elements, your bare skin prickling at the slightest breeze, and every buzzing insect looks at you like an all-you-can-eat buffet. Let's be honest, you probably won't survive this without a severe sunburn or a swift reality check from a passing saber-toothed cat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go ahead and drop your current location and local time in the comments below. I always love seeing where in the world you're tuning in from as the night settles down. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the tall, golden grass of ancient East Africa, feeling a distinct chill that you didn't anticipate. For millions of years, your ancestors sported magnificent full-body fur coats that kept them cozy, protected, and frankly, looking rather dashing. But evolution had other plans, trading that luxurious built-in sweater for the ability to sweat efficiently and run down prey over long distances without overheating. Mainstream historical consensus tells us that Homo erectus shed most of their thick body hair around 2 million years ago to adapt to this high-energy lifestyle on the hot plains. Suddenly, you're left looking remarkably bare, a fleshy, vulnerable bipod navigating a world full of thorny bushes and sharp-edged rocks. It turns out that losing your fur was fantastic for endurance running, but absolutely terrible for casual afternoon lounging when the temperature dips. As you look around at your hairless companions, you realise that nature left you with a bit of a design flaw. A quirky, fringe tidbit popular among certain evolutionary theorists suggests our sudden hairlessness might have been accelerated by a brief, semi-aquatic phase where wading through shallow waters made thick fur an awkward, soggy liability. Whether or not you were a prehistoric beach bum, the immediate consequence remains the same. Your bare skin is entirely at the mercy of the environment. Without fur, you are losing body heat the moment the sun slips behind the horizon, and those mosquito bites are starting to look genuinely hostile. Historians still argue whether the initial push toward covering up was driven by a biological need for thermal regulation, or if it was an accidental discovery born from using animal remains for entirely different purposes. Either way, you look at a discarded antelope pelt resting near the campfire, and a revolutionary idea begins to form in your chilly, rapidly evolving brain. You pick up the heavy, slightly stiff hide, drape it awkwardly over your shoulders, and feel the first primitive embrace of what will eventually become a multi-billion-dollar global fashion industry. You wrap that stiff antelope hide tighter around your shivering frame, but as the campfire crackles softly, you notice a strange, persistent itching sensation beginning to spread across your skin. It turns out that losing your thick, luxurious ancestral fur coat solved your overheating problems, but it created an entirely new, incredibly microscopic roommate crisis. Millions of tiny, biting hitchhikers are suddenly very confused about where they are supposed to live. Mainstream evolutionary biologists have actually used the genetic divergence of human head lice and body lice to pinpoint exactly when we started wearing clothes regularly, tracking the mutation to roughly 170,000 years ago. You see, head lice love the dense canopy of your scalp, but body lice specifically evolved to cling to the fibres of clothing, meaning our wardrobe choices literally created a brand new ecological niche for a parasite. It is a slightly unsettling realization to think that your cozy new outfit is essentially a luxury condo development for prehistoric pests. As you sit by the embers, frantically scratching at your arms, you start to wonder if this whole fashion experiment is actually worth the trouble. A quirky, fringe tidbit floating around the corners of experimental anthropology suggests that early humans might have initially smeared themselves with pungent mud and crushed aromatic leaves not for camouflage, but as a chemical barrier against these relentless bugs, making mud the true, messy predecessor to the modern leather jacket. Imagine walking around looking like a walking pottery project just to keep the local flea population at bay. You look at your companions, all of them engaged in a rhythmic, synchronized interpretive dance of swatting and scratching against the evening breeze. This itchy standoff creates a massive biological puzzle that keeps researchers awake at night. Historians still argue whether the reduction of our ancestral body hair happened primarily to rid us of these disease-carrying parasites in the first place, or if the clothes themselves were what allowed us to shed our fur without freezing to death during the chilly African nights. It is a classic chicken and egg scenario, or perhaps more accurately a louse and leather scenario. If you take the clothing off, you freeze. If you leave it on, you invite an entire civilization of tiny tenants to feast on your midsection. To survive, your ancestors had to learn how to clean, cure and manipulate these animal skins so they were less hospitable to uninvited guests. You run a hand over the rough interior of your hide garment, realizing that your fight for survival is no longer just about outrunning apex predators on the savannah, but about managing a micro-ecosystem that lives right against your chest. You settle deeper into the earth, listening to the soft hum of the night, knowing that this uneasy compromise with the insect kingdom is the only thing keeping the midnight chill from freezing you down to the bone. You pull that scratchy antelope hide tighter around your shoulders, but the African savannah is rapidly fading from your rearview mirror as your relentless footsteps lead you northward into an entirely different kind of peril. The air grows sharper, crisper, and eventually downright hostile. Welcome to the late Pleistocene epoch, where a massive continental wall of ice dominates the landscape, and the local weather forecast is permanently set to a brutal, bone-chilling freeze. Your bare skin doesn't stand a chance out here, and you quickly realise that casual draping is no longer going to cut it. You need an actual, fully engineered outfit if you want to avoid becoming a permanent human popsicle. Mainstream anthropological consensus shows that Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens surviving in these glacial European environments had to master the art of intensive hide processing, using stone scrapers to painstakingly remove fat, tissue and flesh from animal skins to prevent them from rotting and turning into stiff, unwearable boards. You spend hours hunched over a heavy mammoth pelt, your knuckles aching as you scrape away at the stubborn tissue, the rhythmic scritch-scratch of your flint tool acting as a soothing prehistoric white noise machine. A quirky fringe tidbit from experimental archaeology suggests that early humans may have heavily relied on their own teeth as a primary softening tool, literally chewing on the tough edges of stiff leather for hours on end to make it pliable enough to wrap around an arm or a leg. Imagine spending your evening chewing on a dirty reindeer hide like a human chew toy just so you can move your elbows the next morning. Your jaw muscles would be absolutely legendary, though your dental bills would be astronomical. You look across the fire at an elder member of your clan, rhythmically gnawing on a boot-shaped piece of leather, looking for all the world like a relaxed grandpa enjoying a particularly stubborn piece of jerky. This desperate struggle against the encroaching frost highlights a deep divide in the scientific community regarding our ancient cousins. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals possessed the cognitive capacity to create complex, multi-layered, tailored clothing like Homo sapiens did, or if they merely draped loose, untailored capes over themselves, rendering them far more vulnerable to the shifting, volatile climate of the Ice Age. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we haven't even talked about yet? Well, out here, you'd trade a lifetime supply of it for just one decent pair of thermal underpants. You tuck a flap of mammoth fur beneath your feet, feeling the radiant warmth of the campfire fight against the biting glacial wind, realizing that every scrape of your stone tool is a direct defiance of the ice that wants nothing more than to claim your bones. You watch the elder of your tribe finish chewing on that stubborn piece of reindeer leather, and while it is soft now, you quickly realize that simply wrapping a floppy piece of skin around your thigh isn't going to keep out a sub-zero blizzard. The wind finds every single gap, whistling through the open seams and freezing your skin in seconds. To survive the brutal, unforgiving peak of the Ice Age, humanity needed a technological revolution, and it arrived not in the form of a massive wheel or a bronze sword, but as a tiny, delicate sliver of bone. Mainstream archaeologists widely recognize the invention of the eyed needle, crafted meticulously from bird bones, mammoth tusks, or deer antlers, as one of the most critical leaps in human prehistory dating back over 40,000 years. This tiny tool allowed you to punch a hole through dense hides and pull a thread of animal sinew, plant fibre or split gut right through it, sealing out the deadly draught for the very first time. You sit close to the hearth, your fingers trembling slightly from the cold as you use a sharp flint awl to pre-punch holes into two overlapping pieces of soft fox fur. It is a slow, meditative process that requires immense patience. One wrong twist and your delicate bone needle will snap right in half, forcing you to spend hours carving a new one. A quirky, fringe tidbit from historical fashion analysis suggests that the earliest threads might have sometimes been made from dried, braided human hair, meaning you could literally be wearing a sweater stitched together with your cousin's old haircuts. Talk about keeping it in the family. You carefully feed a long strand of dried reindeer sinew through the tiny eye of your needle, pulling it taut, watching the two separate furs pull together into a tight, windproof seam that looks surprisingly neat. This breakthrough in garment construction completely changed the game for our species as we pushed deeper into the frozen unknown. Historians still argue whether the invention of tailored clothing was the primary factor that allowed Homo sapiens to outcompete and outlast Neanderthals, who may have succumbed to the cold simply because their wardrobe lacked the sophisticated body-hugging architecture enabled by the eyed needle. You tuck your arms inside your newly stitched sleeves, feeling a rush of trapped warm air that stays right where it belongs, against your skin. You lean back against the cave wall, listening to the gentle shh of your companions working their needles in the dark, realizing that this humble, tiny piece of bone is the only thing standing between your lineage and total extinction. You run your fingers along the neat, tight seams of your newly stitched fox fur tunic, feeling a profound sense of relief as the freezing Ice Age wind is successfully kept at bay. But as the centuries roll forward, and the great glaciers begin their slow, groaning retreat toward the poles, the global thermometer takes a welcome turn for the balmy. Suddenly, you find yourself walking through a lush, sun-drenched landscape, where wearing heavy, multi-layered animal pelts is no longer a matter of survival. It is a recipe for a heat stroke. Yet, curiously, you don't simply strip down to your bare skin and return to the carefree, naked days of your distant ancestors. Mainstream sociological and anthropological research suggests that once humans accustomed themselves to body coverings, the function of clothing rapidly shifted from basic thermal survival to a complex tool for social communication, modesty, and group identity. You walk into a bustling early Neolithic settlement, noticing that everyone is wearing some form of woven plant wrap or light leather apron, despite the glorious warm afternoon sun. A quirky fringe tidbit championed by some psychological anthropologists suggests that human modesty didn't actually create clothing, but rather, clothing accidentally created modesty. The theory goes that once certain parts of the body were routinely covered up for protection against thorns and insects, those specific areas acquired a newfound mystery and taboo, transforming a practical shield into a moral necessity. Imagine your distant ancestors accidentally inventing the concept of a scandalous outfit, just because they wanted to protect their thighs from getting scratched by a wild blackberry bush. You adjust your own woven belt, suddenly feeling a bizarre, uniquely human wave of self-consciousness when a gust of wind displaces your apron. This psychological shift opens up a massive debate about the true nature of our early social structures. Historians still argue whether the concept of modesty was universally developed as a way to minimize sexual conflict within increasingly crowded permanent villages, or if it was imposed from the top down by early spiritual leaders who associated bare skin with a lack of spiritual discipline. Remember that intense scratching you suffered back on the savannah from those uninvited body lice? Now, the discomfort is entirely mental, a strange, invisible pressure to conform to what your neighbours deem appropriate. You take a seat on a smooth stone bench near the village centre, watching the local weavers manipulate wild flax fibres, realising that your clothes are no longer just keeping you alive. They are telling everyone around you exactly who you are, what you value, and where you belong in this brave new world. You sit on that smooth stone bench, adjusting your woven flax apron as you realise that simply fitting in with your neighbours isn't quite enough anymore. Now that everyone in the village is covering up, a plain wrap of plant fibre feels a bit, well, ordinary. As the tribal hierarchy deepens, you find yourself wanting to make sure everyone who walks past knows exactly how successful, powerful, and utterly important you are. Mainstream archaeological excavations across Eurasia have revealed that Upper Paleolithic and Neolithic grave sites are often packed with thousands of painstakingly carved mammoth ivory beads, pierced seashells, and fox teeth sewn directly into the clothing of the deceased. These garments weren't meant for hunting or gathering. They were heavy, noisy, magnificent status symbols designed to flash and jingle with every single step you took, projecting absolute dominance over your peers. You stand up, the heavy hem of your ceremonial leather tunic clattering softly as hundreds of polished bone discs swing against your knees. It is an incredibly tedious outfit to wear, and honestly it weighs a ton, but the looks of pure envy from the passing hunters make the lower back pain completely worth it. A quirky fringe tidbit from historical dress analysis suggests that some of these heavily decorated garments were so encrusted with hundreds of pounds of ivory beadwork that the wearer could barely sit down or raise their arms without assistance, making the inability to do manual labour the ultimate ancient flex. Imagine walking into a gathering looking like a walking jewellery box, completely unable to pick up a dropped berry because your shirt is too stiff with wealth. You catch your reflection in a still pool of water, your chest gleaming with rows of predators' teeth, looking like a prehistoric rock star who has never worked a day in his life. This obsession with ancient drip introduces a fascinating debate about the origins of human economy. Historians still argue whether these highly decorated garments served as the very first physical form of currency, allowing tribes to wear their entire life savings on their backs during migrations to trade with distant clans, or if they were purely spiritual armour meant to protect the wearer's soul from evil spirits. Remember how we talked about the bone needle completely changing the game for human survival in the freezing tundra? Well, now that same needle is being used to stitch your bank account directly onto your lapel. You walk through the village square, letting the rhythmic, metallic-sounding click of your ivory beads announce your arrival long before you even speak, fully aware that this extravagant display of prehistoric bling has set a precedent that will echo all the way to modern high-fashion runways. You step out from the shade of the village huts, your ivory beads clinking softly, but the air is rapidly drying out as you find yourself transported to the shimmering, brutal heat of the ancient Nile Valley. Out here, under the blinding gaze of the sun god Ra, those heavy leather tunics and elaborate bone decorations would quite literally cook you alive. In this scorching desert environment, the goal of clothing flips completely upside down. It is no longer about trapping your body heat, but about reflecting the relentless solar radiation while keeping your skin from turning into a piece of cracked jerky. Mainstream Egyptologists note that the ancient Egyptians mastered the cultivation of flax to create linen, a fabric so incredibly light, breathable and sheer that it allowed sweat to evaporate instantly, keeping the wearer remarkably cool in 40-degree heat. You look down at your simple white linen kilt, marvelling at how it feels almost like wearing nothing at all, catching every stray breeze that wafts off the river, but even the finest linen can't protect your face, neck and shoulders from the punishing ultraviolet rays. To survive this climate, you have to turn to a rather messy alternative form of wearable protection. A quirky fringe tidbit from ancient cosmetic history reveals that early Egyptians would slather their exposed skin in a thick, pasty concoction of animal fats, plant oils, and sometimes even crocodile dung or crushed beetles to act as a physical barrier against the sun and biting flies. Imagine walking around smelling like a swamp reptile just so your nose doesn't peel like a sunburned onion. You rub a bit of the oily paste onto your shoulders, grimacing at the pungent aroma, but instantly feeling a cooling shield settle over your skin as you face the midday glare. This intense battle against the elements reveals how deeply environment shaped our early cultural rituals. Historians still argue whether the elaborate heavy black coal eyeliner worn by both Egyptian men and women was primarily a fashionable religious tribute to the gods, or if it functioned as a highly practical ancient version of glare reduction tech, much like the black grease modern football players smear under their eyes to see clearly in bright stadiums. Remember that fox fur tunic you wore back in the Ice Age to stay alive? Out here, that lifestyle feels like a distant, frosty nightmare. You watch a line of fishermen pull their nets from the river, their dark skin gleaming with protective oils, realizing that whether you're dodging a glacier or a desert sun, humanity will always find a way to paint, wrap, and treat the body to cheat the climate and look good doing it. You wipe a bit of that smelly crocodile dung sun balm from your forehead, looking down at your bare feet as they press into the blistering golden sands of the Egyptian desert. While your linen kilt is doing a fantastic job of keeping your upper body cool, your poor soles are absolutely roasting on the baked earth, and every sharp pebble or stray thorn feels like a personal insult. You quickly realise that protecting your body is only half the battle. If you can't walk, you can't hunt, farm, or flee from danger. Mainstream archaeological discoveries, such as the famous 5,500-year-old Arini 1 leather shoe found in Armenia, prove that humanity eventually realised their vulnerable, hairless feet needed dedicated armour. Early footwear began as simple, ingenious wraps of sagebrush bark, rawhide or woven grass, tailored to form a protective barrier between human skin and the unforgiving terrain of the ancient world. You sit down on a sun-warmed boulder, pulling a strip of tough, dried papyrus reed toward you, to fashion a basic pair of woven sandals. Your fingers work the fibres into a thick, flat sole, tracing the shape of your foot before threading a crude strap up through the toes to anchor it securely around your ankle. A quirky, fringed tidbit from the annals of experimental archaeology suggests that some of the earliest Ice Age stuffed boots discovered in frozen caves were packed so tightly with dried moss and insulating hay that they were essentially the prehistoric equivalents of modern Ugg boots. Incredibly cosy, slightly shapeless, and probably smelling like a wet barnyard after a long walk through the marsh. You slip your new reed sandals on, standing up to take a tentative step, feeling a wave of relief as you stomp directly onto a sharp twig without wincing. This evolutionary leap down to our toes highlights a major discussion about how human migration actually worked. Historians still argue whether the invention of specialized footwear was the primary catalyst that allowed early humans to migrate out of warm climates and conquer rugged, mountainous terrains that would have otherwise shredded bare feet within days, or if shoes were a much later luxury developed only when trading routes became established. Remember that magnificent mammoth ivory bling you wore to flex on your neighbours? Well, a sturdy pair of shoes might not turn heads at a tribal gathering, but they will actually keep you alive when you're trekking over a jagged mountain pass. You look down at your woven sandals, watching the dust swirl over the straps, realising that this simple piece of foot armour is what truly gave humanity the freedom to walk across the face of the entire planet. You look down at your woven reed sandals, watching the dust swirl over the straps, but as you lift your eyes, the dry desert sands give way to a lush, green landscape of irrigated fields stretching along the banks of the majestic Nile. You are now stepping into the height of the Egyptian New Kingdom, where the art of clothing has evolved from mere survival wraps into a sophisticated, highly organised industry of agricultural textile production. Mainstream Egyptologists note that the production of linen was a massive state-sponsored enterprise, where vast fields of blue-flowered flax were harvested by hand, soaked in water to rot away the tough outer stalks, and then painstakingly beaten and combed into fine, golden fibres that could be spun into incredibly delicate threads. You find yourself standing inside a bustling, sun-drenched weaving workshop, the air filled with a fine mist of lint, and the rhythmic, hypnotic clack-clack-clack of horizontal ground looms. You pull a newly woven linen tunic over your head, marvelling at how sheer and gossamer thin the fabric is. It feels almost like a cool mist against your skin, catching the slightest breeze coming off the river. A quirky, fringe tidbit from ancient domestic records suggests that to keep these sheer linen garments perfectly pleated, a massive trend among the elite, servants would treat the fabric with a stiffening rinse made from sour beer and liquid starch, then press the folds with heavy heated stones. Imagine walking into a high society banquet looking absolutely pristine, but smelling faintly like a local tavern because your outfit was literally laundered in fermented alcohol. You adjust your crisp, beer-stiffened pleats, trying your absolute best not to spill your actual drink down your front during a formal dinner. This incredible obsession with pristine, bright white linen highlights a deep social divide within the ancient world. Historians still argue whether the extreme sheerness of Egyptian garments was a practical adaptation to maximize evaporation and cooling in a brutal climate, or if it was deliberately designed as a provocative status symbol to show off flawless, unblemished skin that had never been subjected to hard, manual outdoor labour. Remember that crocodile dung sun balm you had to smear on your shoulders just to survive the equatorial heat? Now, if you are wealthy enough, you can simply stay indoors under a shade canopy while your servants fan you, leaving your delicate linen completely clean. You watch a group of high-ranking scribes converse near the temple entrance, their pleated white robes gleaming brilliantly in the afternoon sun, realizing that fabric has officially transitioned from a protective shield into a powerful silent language of wealth, purity, and absolute social dominance. You adjust your crisp, beer-stiffened Egyptian pleats, but the humid air of the Nile Valley suddenly turns crisp and breezy as you find yourself standing on a bustling stone street in the heart of the Roman Republic. The delicate, gossamer-thin linen of the East is gone, replaced by something much heavier, denser, and infinitely more frustrating to manage. You're now wrapped in yards of thick, undyed sheep's wool, struggling to maintain your balance under the immense weight of a traditional Roman toga. Mainstream classical historians emphasize that the toga was never a casual loungewear item. It was a highly complex state-mandated garment of citizenship, measuring up to 18 feet wide and folded into intricate, precise configurations that required the assistance of a trained slave just to put on correctly. You stand in the forum, your left arm draped heavily with thick woolen folds, trying to look politically elite and dignified while secretly praying you don't trip over your own hem. The garment is notoriously impractical. It has no pockets, no buttons, and if you move your right arm too fast, the entire structure unspools into a chaotic pile of fabric at your feet. A quirky, fringe tidbit from Roman daily life reveals that because wool absorbs sweat and oils beautifully, Romans cleaned their dirty togas using fullers, who laundered the heavy garments in large tubs filled with aged human urine collected from public jars. The ammonia in the urine acted as a natural bleaching agent to get those pristine senatorial whites, meaning your high-status, politically dominant outfit was literally stomped clean in a giant vat of stranger's pee. You sniff your sleeve cautiously, hoping the lavender scent applied afterward is doing its job against the underlying chemical reality. This cumbersome drapery reflects the rigid societal hierarchy that governed every single breath in the ancient metropolis. Historians still argue whether the extreme physical restriction of the toga was an accidental flaw of fashion history, or if it was deliberately maintained to show that the wearer was an elite gentleman of leisure who didn't need to perform a single second of physical labour. Remember that sturdy pair of bark sandals you made to protect your feet from sharp rocks? Out here, your footwear is a status symbol too, with senators wearing distinct red leather calcei to mark their rank. You take a slow, measured step across the marble plaza, carefully pinning your left arm to your side to keep your woolen folds from collapsing, realizing that civilized fashion has officially turned into an elaborate sweaty endurance sport. You carefully pin your left arm to your side to keep those heavy Roman woolen folds from collapsing, but the cold marble of the forum dissolves beneath your feet, replaced by the damp, muddy floor of a drafty stone keep in medieval Europe. The sunlit empire has fragmented, and so has the way you dress. You are now standing in the great hall, shivering slightly as a damp winter chill creeps through the arrow slits. To combat this perpetually drafty existence, you are practicing the fine art of the medieval layering masterclass. Mainstream medieval historians show that clothing during this period was entirely structured around a rigid sequence of layers. A linen chemise or shirt worn closest to the skin to absorb oils, followed by a tight-fitting woolen kirtle or tunic, and topped with an ornate over-tunic hood and heavy cloak to seal out the elements. You stand by a massive fireplace, sweating through multiple heavy tunics to prove your noble, wealthy societal standing, because in this world, fabric equals fortune. The more layers you wear, and the more excess fabric that trails along the floor behind you, the more clearly you communicate that you have money to burn and servants to clean your hems. A quirky, fringe tidbit from medieval legal history reveals that sumptuary laws were strictly enacted to prevent wealthy merchants from dressing like royalty, dictating everything down to the exact length of the absurdly long, pointed shoes known as poulaines. If you were a commoner, your shoes could only extend a few inches past your toes, but if you were a nobleman, your shoes could be so ridiculously long that you had to tie the tips to your knees with silver chains, just to avoid face-planting into the rushes. Imagine walking into a feast looking like a festive elf just to prove you own a manor house. This frantic overlayering and accessorizing highlights a fundamental shift in how Europeans viewed bodily health and morality. Historians still argue whether the medieval obsession with wearing multiple heavy layers of wool and linen was purely a response to the Little Ice Age's drop in global temperatures, or if it was heavily driven by religious doctrines that viewed the exposed human silhouette as an inherently sinful distraction from spiritual purity. Remember that public urine vat used to bleach your Roman toga? Down here, laundry is an even more intense ordeal, involving wood ash, lye, and a massive amount of physical scrubbing down by the riverbank. You adjust your heavy, fur-lined collar, listening to the crackle of the green wood on the fire, realizing that your clothes have become a physical fortress, not just protecting you from the icy drafts of the castle, but locking you securely into your exact slot in the feudal hierarchy. You adjust your heavy fur-lined collar against the castle draft, but the damp stone walls suddenly dissolve into a brightly lit wood-panelled court, exploding with vibrant silks, feathers, and the theatrical luxury of the High Renaissance. The modest, protective fortresses of medieval layering have broken wide open into an era of bold, athletic and fiercely competitive display. As you look around the court of King Henry VIII, you realise that menswear has taken a turn for the incredibly dramatic, shifting its focus from elegant drapery to extreme, almost aggressive physical proportion. Mainstream fashion historians point out that the Renaissance silhouette was all about projecting immense physical power and fertility, leading to the widespread adoption of heavy shoulder padding, slashed fabric sleeves that burst with contrasting linings, and most famously the codpiece. What began as a simple, practical triangular flap of fabric to connect two separate legs of woolen hose quickly evolved into a heavily padded, structured, and often absurdly exaggerated architectural feature that projected absolute political and masculine dominance. You stand near the royal banquet table, checking your reflection in a polished silver platter, trying to look comfortable while sporting a dangerously prominent, jewel-encrusted codpiece that projects outward like a miniature ship's prow. It is an undeniably ridiculous accessory by modern standards, but out here on the court floor, a larger coined piece literally signals a larger political status. A quirky, fringed tidbit from Renaissance textile archives reveals that these exaggerated structural garments were so large they frequently doubled as actual pockets, with noblemen tucking gold coins, expensive silk handkerchiefs, and even small dried sweetmeats or visual treats right inside their codpieces to pull out later during a long, tedious council meeting. Imagine sitting through a high-stakes diplomatic negotiation and casually reaching into your groin area to offer the Spanish ambassador a candied plum. This hyper-masculine theatricality sparks a fascinating conversation about the nature of royal performance. Historians still argue whether the codpiece's explosive popularity was purely a psychological tool to project youth, vigour, and dynastic stability during an era of volatile political alliances, or if its heavy padding was popularised to conceal bulky, medicated bandages required to treat the painful symptoms of the syphilis epidemic sweeping through Europe's elite at the time. Remember those ridiculously long pointed poulain shoes you had to tie to your knees with silver chains? Out here, the shoes have flattened into wide, duck-billed slippers, but the sheer, competitive absurdity of fashion remains completely unchanged. You watch a young courtier bow deeply to the monarch, his heavily padded shoulders making him look 3 feet wide, realising that clothing has moved entirely past the realm of bodily comfort, and into a realm of pure, unadulterated political theatre. You watch that young courtier bow deeply, his heavily padded shoulders shifting under his silk doublet, but the vibrant, muscular theatricality of the Renaissance court swiftly gives way to the rigid, highly manicured elegance of the 18th century Enlightenment. The focus of fashion's architectural engineering has shifted across the aisle. You're now standing in a lavishly gilded French salon, surrounded by towering mirrors, powdered wigs, and the soft clink of porcelain teacups. While the men have traded their padded codpieces for sleek velvet coats and knee breeches, the female silhouette has been transformed into a breathtaking, highly disciplined work of structural art. Mainstream dress historians emphasise that the elite Western wardrobe during this era was entirely anchored by stays and corsets, rigid bodices reinforced with strips of whalebone, reeds or metal, designed to compress the waist, flatten the torso, and push the bust upward to create an idealised aristocratic posture that exuded poise and self-control. You stand near a large sash window, trying to breathe deeply, while encased in a heavily structured bodice that forces your spine into a perfectly straight, unyielding line. Your movements are restricted, your lung capacity is slightly reduced, and your shoulders are pulled back so far that holding a fan feels like a minor athletic feat. A quirky fringe tidbit from historical medicine reveals that some extreme fashionistas of the era were so determined to achieve the tiniest possible waistline that they would swallow small pieces of sponge or drink small doses of diluted vinegar, erroneously believing it would shrink their internal organs and make their corsetry less painful. Imagine drinking salad dressing for breakfast just to make your rigid whalebone cage feel a 1/4 inch looser. You carefully sip your tea, making sure your elbows remain elegantly tucked against your ribs, exactly as your deportment coach instructed. This obsession with structural body modification ignites a fierce, long-standing debate among modern cultural critics. Historians still argue whether the corset was a literal instrument of patriarchal oppression, designed to physically weaken women and confine them to passive sedentary roles, or if women viewed it as a highly empowering symbol of elite status, hygiene, and moral rectitude that offered necessary physical support while navigating the grueling etiquette of royal court life. Remember that sheer Egyptian linen you wore to feel a cool breeze off the Nile? Out here, that breezy freedom is replaced by heavy silk brocades stretched over wide wicker frames called panniers, which make you so wide you have to walk through doorways sideways. You glide across the polished parquet floor, your rigid framework hidden beneath layers of pastel fabric, realizing that humanity has officially mastered the art of transforming the living body into a beautifully sculpted piece of living furniture. You glide across that polished parquet floor, your rigid framework hidden beneath layers of pastel silk, but the delicate clink of porcelain teacups is suddenly drowned out by a deafening rhythmic roar of iron machinery. The quiet, hand-woven world of the Enlightenment has vanished, replaced by the soot-stained sky and clanging energy of the Industrial Revolution. You're standing inside a massive, multi-story British textile mill, the air thick with the smell of machine oil and the fine, floating haze of raw cotton dust. Mainstream economic historians mark this era as the single most explosive transformation in human wardrobe history, driven by inventions like Eli Whitney's cotton gin and James Hargreaves' spinning jenny, which shifted fabric production out of cosy cottages and into hyper-efficient steam-powered factories, turning textiles from a precious generational luxury into a mass-produced global commodity. You walk down the narrow aisle between rows of massive thrashing mechanical looms, watching thousands of silver spindles whir at dizzying speeds. It is a mesmerizing, slightly terrifying spectacle. The machines move with a brutal mechanical precision that makes human fingers look impossibly slow. A quirky, fringe tidbit from industrial folklore suggests that the early mill workers were so constantly surrounded by the unique, penetrating odour of whale oil lubricants used on the iron gears that their clothes became permanently infused with a distinct marine scent, meaning a city worker could easily be identified in a crowd because they smelled faintly like a deep-sea fishing boat. Imagine walking into a modern office building smelling like a humpback whale just because you work in fashion. You pull a clean handkerchief from your pocket, pressing it to your nose to block out the overwhelming blend of grease and raw fibre. This sudden abundance of cheap uniform cloth completely rewrote the rules of human society. Historians still argue whether the industrialization of textiles truly democratized fashion by allowing the working class to dress in clean, respectable garments previously reserved for the wealthy, or if it merely accelerated a cruel system of global exploitation, driving the horrific expansion of plantation slavery and hazardous factory labor conditions. Remember that jewel-encrusted Renaissance codpiece you wore to prove your elite status at court? Out here, that individual artistry is replaced by bolts of identical calico fabric rolling off the line by the mile. You watch a young boy deftly tie a broken thread on a spinning frame without pausing the machine, realizing that your clothes are no longer crafted by the loving hands of a local artisan. They are the standardized products of steam, steel, and a global supply chain that is changing the face of the earth. You pull that clean handkerchief from your nose as the deafening roar of the steam looms fades into a heavy, oppressive silence. The soot-stained factory air clears, revealing a sombre, velvet-draped parlour in late 19th century London. You're now standing in the heart of the Victorian era, where industrial mass production has met a hyper-rigid, deeply morbid social code. Following the profound, decades-long grief of Queen Victoria over the death of Prince Albert, high society has transformed mourning into a complex, multi-tiered fashion industry. Mainstream social historians emphasize that Victorian mourning etiquette was a cutthroat social minefield, requiring widows to dress in solid, non-reflective black silk crepe for a minimum of 2 full years, slowly transitioning through stages of second mourning and half mourning, using shades of grey, mauve, or white. You look down at your heavy jet-black wool frock coat and matching dark gloves, feeling the weight of an entire society's expectations resting squarely on your shoulders. Every element of your attire must broadcast your exact level of sorrow to the passing world. A quirky, fringe tidbit from Victorian retail history reveals that special mourning warehouses, most notably Jay's of Regent Street, became the world's very first highly specialized department stores, featuring rapid morning sections where a family could order an entire matching wardrobe of black attire to be delivered via horse-drawn carriage within hours of a relative's passing. Imagine a proto-Amazon delivery service, but exclusively for grim, sorrowful weeds and heavy veils, arriving at your doorstep before the local mortician has even tipped his hat. You adjust your stiff black collar, navigating the dim parlour room while trying not to knock over an elaborate display of taxidermied birds under glass. This intense, theatrical policing of grief highlights a fascinating contradiction in Victorian psychology. Historians still argue whether these elaborate mourning costumes were a genuine, comforting ritual that allowed grieving individuals to find public sympathy and space to heal, or if it was an exhausting, expensive social performance designed to bankrupt the middle class while keeping women isolated behind heavy, suffocating veils that restricted their vision and breathing. Remember that pungent crocodile dung sunscreen you used to survive the Egyptian heat? Out here in the foggy London gloom, your skin is shielded by heavy black dyes, some of which, ironically containing trace amounts of arsenic, frequently cause severe skin rashes and respiratory issues for the wearers. You watch a woman adjust her thick, weeping veil across from you, her movements slow and deliberate, realizing that clothing has officially become a physical manifestation of grief itself, trapping human emotion within the rigid, unyielding threads of social decorum. You watch that woman adjust her thick, weeping veil across from you, the sombre parlour dissolving as the heavy black wool of Victorian grief falls away. The dark, structured codes of the 19th century explode into a vibrant, high-speed blur of the mid-20th century. You're now standing inside a sleek, brightly lit laboratory at the dawn of the space-age fabric boom. The traditional monopoly of sheep, silkworms and flax fields has been shattered by a team of chemists, swirling test tubes filled with petroleum byproducts. Mainstream industrial historians point to the late 1930s and 1950s as a seismic rupture in human attire, marked by the invention of nylon by Wallace Carruthers at DuPont, followed rapidly by polyester and spandex. For the first time in 2 million years of human history, we are wrapping ourselves in fabrics that were born not in a field or on an animal's back, but inside a pressurized chemical reactor. You pull a modern, stretchy synthetic windbreaker over your shoulders, marveling at how impossibly light it feels compared to the heavy woolens of the past. It doesn't wrinkle, it repels water like a duck's back, and it stretches dynamically with every twist of your torso. A quirky fringe tidbit from early marketing history reveals that when nylon stockings were first introduced to the public in 1940, they caused literal riots in department stores, with thousands of women fighting over limited supplies. During World War II, when nylon was rationed exclusively for military parachutes, some women were so desperate for the synthetic look that they painted their bare legs with dark gravy browning and used an eyeliner pencil to draw fake seams down the back of their calves. Imagine walking into a high society dance smelling faintly of Sunday roast, just to convince everyone you're wearing the latest high-tech polymer. This synthetic revolution completely transformed our physical relationship with our apparel. Historians still argue whether the invention of synthetic fibres was an unmitigated triumph that democratized easy care, affordable athletic wear for the global masses, or if it was a catastrophic turning point that permanently detached humanity from natural life cycles, introducing an indestructible plastic footprint into our wardrobes. Remember that ancient Roman toga that had to be laundered in public urine vats just to clean out the sweat? Your new synthetic shirt can be thrown into a spinning mechanical washing machine and dried in 20 minutes, though you notice it traps body heat and odours in a strangely synthetic, plasticky way after a long day. You step out of the laboratory into a bustling mid-century street, watching the kaleidoscope of bright, colour-fast garments flash past, realising that humanity has officially broken free from the limits of nature to weave a new, chemical skin. You step out of the laboratory into that bustling mid-century street, watching the kaleidoscope of bright, colour-fast synthetic garments flash past. But as you walk deeper into the decades of the late 20th century, the shiny polymers of the future take a backseat to something far more rugged, faded and unpretentious. You find yourself walking down a gravel road in the American West, surrounded by ranchers, labourers and a growing counterculture movement. You're wearing a pair of stiff, dark blue denim pants, held together with tiny, strategically placed copper rivets. mainstream textile historians attribute the birth of modern blue jeans to an ingenious collaboration between a Latvian tailor named Jacob Davis and a German dry goods merchant named Levi Strauss in 1873, who patented the process of reinforcing pocket seams on heavy cotton duck and denim trousers to survive the brutal daily grind of gold miners and loggers. You run a hand down the coarse indigo-dyed surface of your thighs, feeling the absolute utility of the fabric. It is tough as iron, completely indifferent to grease or dirt, and oddly comforting in its rigidity. A quirky, fringe tidbit from cultural fashion history reveals that in the 1950s, blue jeans were considered so fiercely rebellious and antisocial, thanks to silver screen icons like Marlon Brando and James Dean, that they were officially banned from public schools, theatres and upscale restaurants across America. Wearing jeans wasn't just a casual choice, it was a loud declaration that you rejected the stiff, buttoned-up formality of your parents' generation. Imagine being kicked out of an ice cream parlour just because you wore a pair of durable pants that had copper rivets on the pockets. You lean against a wooden fence post, flashing a slightly sarcastic smile as a passing businessman in a three-piece suit gives your casual attire a deeply disapproving look. This global takeover of denim sparks an enduring conversation about the true language of democratic dress. Historians still argue whether blue jeans became the ultimate global uniform because they represented a genuine egalitarian breakdown of class barriers, allowing billionaires and construction workers to dress identically, or if the luxury fashion industry simply co-opted the clothing of the working class to sell an authentic illusion of rebellion back to the wealthy. Remember that jewel-encrusted, outrageous Renaissance codpiece you wore to project elite political power? Out here, power is projected by looking like you have never stepped foot inside a palace. You adjust your denim waistband, watching the blue fabric slowly soften and conform to the unique shape of your body with every movement, realizing that humanity has finally found a garment that looks better the more you abuse, fray, and wear it down to the ground. You adjust your denim waistband, watching the blue fabric catch the wind, but the dusty gravel road beneath your feet suddenly dissolves into a soundless, terrifying void. The air pressure drops to zero. The sun flares with an unshielded, blinding intensity, and you realize you're no longer standing on the surface of the Earth. You're floating high above the blue planet, suspended in the black expanse of low Earth orbit. Out here, your hairless, vulnerable skin faces the absolute ultimate test of survival. Without a protective barrier, the vacuum of space would boil your bodily fluids, freeze your tissue, and expose you to lethal cosmic radiation within seconds. Mainstream aerospace historians recognize the Apollo-era 7L spacesuit, pioneered by NASA and meticulously handcrafted by the seamstresses of Playtex, International Latex Corporation, as a pinnacle of 20th century textile engineering, featuring 21 separate layers of nylon, neoprene, aluminized mylar and dacron woven together to create a wearable, pressurized spacecraft. You look down at your bulky, pristine white gloves, listening to the rhythmic, soothing hiss-click of your life support system pumping pure oxygen through your helmet. It is an incredibly claustrophobic experience, your movements limited by the stiff internal pressure of the suit, which fights against every bend of your fingers like an inflated balloon. A quirky, fringe tidbit from the history of the space race reveals that during the frantic development of the early Gemini suits, engineers were so concerned about micrometeorite impacts puncturing the fabric that they experimented with weaving panels of ultra-dense ballistic silk and even liquid-cooled underwear systems that circulated chilled water through miles of tiny plastic tubes woven directly against the astronaut's skin. Imagine stepping out into the cosmos wearing what is essentially a high-tech refrigerator hidden inside a massive silk sleeping bag. You wiggle your toes inside your insulated boots, feeling the radiant heat of the sun warming one side of your suit, while the shadow side drops to a freezing -100 degrees. This ultimate frontier of clothing forces us to reconsider what a wardrobe actually represents. Historians still argue whether the spacesuit should be classified as a highly specialized garment or an independent wearable vehicle, debating whether its development was driven more by textile craftsmanship or industrial mechanical engineering. Remember that delicate bone needle you used back in the Ice Age to stitch together your very first windproof fox fur tunic? Out here, That same fundamental concept of sealing out the deadly environment has reached its absolute zenith, using synthetic polymers instead of animal hides to cheat death in a place where humans were never meant to go. You watch the vast, curved horizon of the Earth rotate slowly below your visor, the deep blues and whites of the planet gleaming against the dark void, realizing that your ancient fashion journey has successfully carried you from the muddy riverbanks of the Nile all the way to the stars. You watch the vast, curved horizon of the Earth rotate slowly below your visor, but that cosmic silence is suddenly shattered by the aggressive, chaotic hum of a modern metropolis. The pristine white layers of your spacecraft dissolve, and you find yourself standing in the middle of a brightly lit, cavernous retail store in a crowded shopping district. The air smells heavily of synthetic perfumes, new cardboard, and cheap chemical dyes. You're looking at endless rows of garment racks stacked high with incredibly inexpensive, trendy outfits that look like they stepped right off a social media feed yesterday. Mainstream environmental and economic historians define this contemporary era as the peak of fast fashion, a hyper-accelerated business model that took off in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, turning the global textile industry into a high-speed machine that pumps out dozens of micro-seasons a year, shifting clothes from durable investments into disposable, single-use commodities. You pick up a brightly coloured synthetic top from a bargain bin, looking at the price tag and shaking your head in mild disbelief. It costs less than a fancy cup of coffee, but as you run your fingers over the slick, thin polyester weave, you can feel the true hidden cost hidden within the seams. A quirky fringe tidbit from modern textile waste research reveals that the volume of discarded clothing has grown so massive that immense mountains of unwanted synthetic garments, visible from satellite imagery, are literally forming in places like the Atacama Desert in Chile, creating a bizarre, colourful new geological layer made entirely of old graphic tees and forgotten fast fashion trends. Imagine future archaeologists digging through the earth thousands of years from now and discovering that our civilization's primary contribution to the fossil record is an indestructible stratum of neon spandex and polyester hoodies. You drop the top back into the bin, looking around at the frantic shoppers loading up their baskets with the armfuls of cheap fabric. This modern explosion of hyperconsumption introduces a sobering, urgent debate among global economists and environmental scientists. Historians still argue whether the fast fashion boom has been a positive force for social equity by allowing people of all income levels to participate in modern cultural trends and look professional, or if it represents an unprecedented ecological catastrophe that relies on a cycle of overseas labour exploitation and a permanent crisis of microplastic pollution in our global water supply. Remember that heavy, multi-layered medieval outfit you wore to prove your wealth by how much fabric you could pile on your body? Today, the ultimate flex has completely flipped. True status is often marked by owning fewer, meticulously crafted, sustainably sourced garments that don't rely on a global supply chain of waste. You step out of the frantic retail store into the cool evening air, looking down at your own wardrobe with a completely new perspective, realizing that our ancient relationship with clothing has transformed from a desperate struggle to protect ourselves from nature into an urgent struggle to protect nature from our clothes. You step out of that frantic retail store into the cool evening air, looking down at your own wardrobe with a completely new perspective. As you pull your coat tightly around you against the city breeze, the neon lights of the shopping district begin to soften, bleeding into the digital glow of a high-tech studio. You have arrived at the cutting edge of the present day, where the ancient art of dressing is merging with the boundaries of digital reality and advanced bioengineering. Mainstream fashion technologists observe that we are entering a strange new era where the physical and virtual worlds are completely blurring. People are now purchasing digital-only skins and virtual couture for their online avatars to project status in the metaverse. While in laboratories, scientists are growing self-healing leather from mushroom mycelium and weaving smart fabrics embedded with microscopic sensors that track your vitals in real time. You lift your wrist, watching a faint pulse of light ripple across the sleeve of your jacket, where conductive threads are seamlessly communicating with your smartphone. It is an extraordinary, almost magical evolution. Your clothes are no longer passive objects, but active, living extensions of your digital identity. A quirky, fringe tidbit from avant-garde wearable tech labs reveals that designers have successfully created prototypes of living clothes infused with genetically engineered algae that actually perform photosynthesis as you walk down the street, absorbing carbon dioxide and releasing fresh oxygen. Imagine strolling through a smoggy downtown grid looking incredibly stylish, while your shirt literally acts as a miniature wearable rainforest to clean the city air. You take a deep breath, looking down at the fabric, feeling the subtle rhythmic pulse of the technology woven into your very threads. This digital and biological frontier forces us to ask the ultimate question about the future of human identity. Cultural theorists still argue whether the rise of digital fashion and biofabricated garments will finally liberate humanity from the devastating environmental footprint of physical manufacturing, or if it will merely isolate us further into a hypersynthetic, disconnected existence where our physical bodies matter less than our curated digital projections. Remember that very first piece of cured animal hide you wrapped around your shoulders back in the prehistoric wilderness just to stay warm? 2 million years later, that fundamental urge to shield, decorate, and express yourself has survived ice ages, desert suns, industrial revolutions, and space exploration. You turn your eyes toward the horizon, watching the city lights blink like a massive circuit board, realizing that no matter how advanced our technology becomes, humanity will always find a way to weave its stories, its status, and its survival into the very clothes we wear. You watch those city lights blink like a massive circuit board, but the digital hum of the tech studio begins to warp, stretching forward into the rapidly approaching mid-21st century. The sleek, glowing, smart fabrics of the present day stabilize into something far more responsive, adaptive, and strangely alive. You find yourself walking down a sleek, solar-panelled boulevard in an eco-futuristic metropolis, wearing a garment that fits you like a second, fluid skin. You are witnessing the rise of programmable matter and shape-shifting textiles. Mainstream materials scientists point out that the next great leap in fashion is driven by 4 deprinted fabrics and shape memory polymers that actively respond to their environment, contracting to tighten their weave and block out a sudden freezing downpour, or opening microscopic pores to let your skin breathe the moment the afternoon sun breaks through the clouds. You pause outside a minimalist urban plaza, watching your sleeve automatically shift its texture from a smooth, water-repellent matte finish into an elegant ribbed silk pattern as you step out of the wind. Your clothes are no longer manufactured in fixed sizes or unyielding shapes. They are dynamic systems that continuously calibrate themselves to your immediate physical needs. A quirky, fringe tidbit from advanced biomimicry design labs reveals that engineers have created prototype jackets embedded with microscopic synthetic chromatophores modelled after the skin of cuttlefish. These garments don't just change colour with an app, they subconsciously mirror your physiological mood, shifting to a calming, deep cerulean blue when your heart rate drops, or flashing an aggressive, iridescent amber if you experience a sudden spike of adrenaline. Imagine walking into a high-stakes corporate presentation and having your collar accidentally tell everyone in the room exactly how terrified you are. This total integration of clothing and biology brings us to a compelling new ethical crossroads. Futurists still argue whether these hyper-adaptive living garments will usher in a golden age of radical sustainability, where a single, shape-shifting outfit replaces an entire wardrobe of fast fashion waste, or if it will create a terrifying new dystopia of public vulnerability, where your innermost emotional and biological secrets are broadcast directly onto your sleeves for the world to read. Remember those rigid whalebone Victorian corsets you wore to force your body into a socially acceptable shape? Out here, the fabric doesn't restrict your body, it listens to it, transforming your attire into a living interface between your internal psychology and the external world. You watch a fellow commuter glide past, their coat shifting seamlessly from silver to charcoal as they step into the shade, realizing that fashion has evolved past passive decoration to become a fully conscious, expressive ecosystem. You watch that commuter's coat shift seamlessly from silver to charcoal, but the solar-panelled boulevard rapidly dissolves as the horizon expands into an orange, dust-choked sky. The urban comforts of Earth are gone. You are now standing on the rust-coloured plains of a permanent Mars colony in the late 21st century. Out here, the boundary between everyday fashion and extreme survival gear has permanently evaporated. Mainstream astrobiological historians note that as humanity transitions into a multiplanetary species, domestic clothing has undergone its most radical redesign since the Ice Age. Instead of bulky, rigid EVA suits meant for short spacewalks, off-world colonists wear second-skin counter-pressure jumpsuits, engineered from ultra-elastic carbon nanotubes that mechanically compress the body to replace atmospheric pressure, allowing for effortless movement inside and outside pressurized domes. You step into a bustling subterranean greenhouse, running a hand over your sleek terracotta-coloured jumpsuit. It is incredibly lightweight, yet it is doing the heavy lifting of keeping your organs from expanding in the low Martian pressure, while filtering out the ambient cosmic radiation leaking through the colony's upper shields. A quirky, fringe tidbit from Martian domestic archives reveals that because water is the most precious commodity on the red planet, washing clothes with liquid is strictly illegal. Instead, colonists clean their daily wardrobes using static charge acoustic chambers, which blast the fabric with ultrasonic sound waves and localized electromagnetic fields to literally snap dust and dead skin cells off the fibers in seconds. Imagine stepping into a laundry booth, hearing a brief, high-pitched zap thump, and stepping out perfectly clean, smelling faintly of ionized ozone and stardust. This harsh extraterrestrial reality completely redefines the concept of style. Cultural anthropologists still argue whether Martian fashion represents the ultimate death of human self-expression, reducing all clothing to cold, utilitarian survival metrics, or if it has birthed a proud new aesthetic, where the unique patchwork repairs on a jumpsuit or the specific colour of a radiation-shielding trim function as a prestigious badge of honour, proving how many seasons you have survived on the frontier. Remember those pristine, bright white Egyptian linen robes you wore to show you never had to labour in the sun? Out here, pristine clothes mean you've never left the safety of the central habitat. You look out through the reinforced viewing glass as a massive dust storm rolls across the horizon, your smart weave collar tightening automatically against your neck, realising that fashion has officially become our primary life support system as we claim our place among the stars. Section 23. You look out through that reinforced viewing glass at the swirling Martian dust storm, but the rust-coloured landscape suddenly collapses inward, condensing into a blinding point of light before expanding into a silent, shimmering realm of pure information. The physical universe has fallen away entirely. It is the deep future, and you are standing inside a post-physical, post-biological digital collective. Your physical body is gone, but your consciousness remains, navigating a vast, multi-dimensional network of simulated realities. Mainstream digital historians of this post-human era note that when humanity finally uploaded its consciousness into quantum servers, clothing did not disappear. Instead, freed from the laws of physics, thermodynamics, and textile manufacturing, fashion evolved into the ultimate unrestrained medium of pure conceptual data. You float through an abstract gallery of shifting algorithms testing out your current wardrobe, which is no longer woven from threads, but compiled from raw code. With a simple thought, you drape yourself in a cascading cloak woven out of real-time stellar telemetry from distant galaxies, its fabric shimmering with the actual birth and death of stars. A quirky, fringe tidbit from evolutionary data science archives reveals that in this post-physical world, some radical avant-garde digital fashion designers intentionally write glitch metrics into their virtual garments, purposefully introducing historical rendering errors, fragmented textures, and pixelated tears into their code. Imagine choosing to wear a shirt that constantly stutters and fragments into a cascade of neon green data code, just to prove you are edgy, rebellious, and completely bored by the flawless perfection of a simulated universe. This infinite digital canvas sparks the final profound debate of human expression. Synthetic philosophers still argue whether fashion in a post-physical world represents the purest, most liberated form of human creativity, allowing an individual to look like a living nebula, an ancient architectural temple, or a moving symphony, or if it is a hollow, disorienting echo of a forgotten biological past, proving that humanity remains hopelessly obsessed with projecting artificial status even when the physical constraints of class, gender, and survival have been deleted forever. Remember that very first bone needle you used to stitch animal skins together in the freezing dark? 2 million years of evolution have led to this moment, where the needle is a string of code and the fabric is light itself. You adjust the parameters of your shifting, glowing silhouette, ready to step into the next digital matrix, realizing that as long as human consciousness exists, it will always find a way to dress itself in the fabric of its own imagination.